Hello everyone, welcome to our first podcast series. My name is Dr. Bawan Pshdary. I am one of the co-founders of the British Grammar School. I'm here with my colleague Mr. Preston Evangelu, who's kindly visited us from London in his capacity as a child psychologist to allow us be able to gain insights into amazing aspects of child psychology and enable us create that same environment for the wider community in Kurdistan of Iraq and Iraq in general. British Grammar School, by way of introduction, is the first British school in Iraq and Kurdistan to be a recognised Oxford International Curriculum school, as stated on the Oxford International Curriculum website. And we are also a school that is working towards identifying the equivalence of a British school overseas for this locality. Hence, we are mindful about the standards of requirements for this country, for the Kurdistan of Iraq and Iraq in general, that we have an ultimate requirement of perfection for students, and we tend to equalize that with what we have brought from the United Kingdom. Today's topic, which I have invited Dr. Preston for, or Mr. Preston for, apologies, is that we want to pick his brain on what he can share with us on his knowledge in child psychology. Welcome, Preston.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Dr. Bawan.
My first insight that I want to learn from you is that how have you seen the state of students in Kurdistan of Iraq according to your experience at the British Grammar School, Erbil, for the past 2 weeks?
First of all, the discipline is impressive. Students attending classes on time, prepared, organised and focused. This is paramount in their success and the educational goals setting, so they can achieve what they wish to achieve later in life, not just through academia but also professionally as well. It's good to see organised students.
Amazing. Thank you for that. Now, we are in lots of the schools in Kurdistan of Iraq. We are amidst the midterm exams, or in schools like ours, international schools, as we go by the standards of the Oxford AQA requirements to prepare our students for the international GCSEs and A-levels. We are now approaching our first term, or we are in the midst of our first term exams. Now, we see a lot of stress, a lot of dynamics changing in the livelihood of the students, that I was even shocked to hear that some schools tend to give students less time at school and send them home earlier just because it's the first term or mid-term exams. Now, I would like you to comment on what do you think is the way to best practice the lifestyle of the students during their exam times. What's the best approach to provide a good standard for their livelihood, for their study time, and enable them achieve better during exams?
Well, that's a good question, keeping in mind that we need to observe a balance. There has to be a balance in place so that students can exercise their time reading, preparing and memorising what they need to for the exams. But equally so, they need to be within the class, focused, taught accordingly, the subject matter, and so they can ask questions as well. It's one thing going home and doing your homework or reading, but if there's no opportunity to ask questions, you're not going to understand. And so therefore you need that interactive time with the teacher and also with the parents. The parents need to act in part to support their children's academia. So when the children do go home, they have an opportunity to ask questions to their guardians, whether it be parents or older brothers or sisters, so they can understand the subject matter of what they're trying to learn. So I suppose it's a balance, and discovering where the children are at individually is important too. You might have a certain individual who needs that extra time at school, or needs a little bit of extra time with a TA or a teacher to go over some of the material.
Amazing. I think you've pointed out to something very important when mentioning balance there, and to point out the quality of the balance. We do have an increased focus at the Oxford International Curriculum on things like wellbeing and global skills project. So when it comes to well-being, we have an intense focus on that, because well-being for the British Grammar School Erbil is a unique subject matter that is taught standalone subject, and students are ensured to be well equipped with the well-being along with their parents and the teachers equally. So can you please give us, from your perspective and your background in psychology, and I've known you for many years, that's why I know you have immense experience in psychology as well. Could you give us what is, in your point of view, a definition of well-being, and how would you see that implemented into a child's life, please?
The definition of well-being for me is opportunity to grow. Opportunity to grow in a safe manner, in a relaxed environment. And studying psychology, I've studied psychology for over 20 years. I did my first degree, my master's degree, and I've gone on further studies, and I've discovered that to reverberate Winnicott, that a holding environment is paramount in trying to impart knowledge with a child who is growing into practice, so into understanding more about mathematics or English or any of the other subjects. If you have the child in the comfortable environment where they are relaxed and they want to learn, the desire is there to want to learn, they will do very well. So the whole idea of the reward structure rather than the punishment structure or discipline structure is paramount. So rewarding good effort. And so when you have a child who is struggling, it's not about disciplining that child and pushing that child to forcefully understand the material, but rather reward the child with good efforts and encourage the child's growth.
Wow, that's quite touching, in a sense that I think this necessitates to also reinforce that practice at home as well. Because
yes,
where the child needs reinforcement, the reinforcement is not happening through discipline, and it will happen instead through encouraging or inspiring that child to move forward.
Absolutely, yes. And they need to share in the goal, the purpose of why they're doing this, and to intrinsically embed the idea that if they enjoy the subject matter, they'll get more from it.
Right. So, isn't that fair to say that there should be a commonly understood set of practices for well-being between parents, between children, and their teachers as well?
Absolutely. And one of the encouraging aspects that I've noticed at the British Grammar School, your British Grammar School, is that you are implementing such practices. So you're educating parents as well as the children in understanding how the children might absorb the information in a healthy way. And this is the effort also given by the parents. So the parents are investing in their children, and it is an effort. I mean, having children is always an effort, but the effort should be pointed the right direction. It should be tunneled in such a way that the father or the mother is encouraging this growth through an informed way of doing so. It's because we need to teach the parents in how to do that, not just say, well, you have to do A, B, C, and D. They may not know how to do it. Exactly. They may know the why, but they may not know the how. And so teaching the parents and supporting the parents through that process, they understand how they can get the best out of their children, because, you know, most parents, if not all, want the best for their children.
That's very correct. So it says then the duty of the school, in line with the duty of the parent, that they come into a harmonious state.
Yes, absolutely.
And in that state, I would assume that the child would be the center of all the attention.
Yes.
Because then the success of the child is not seen as a victorious endeavor for the school, neither for the parent. Because I think that's where we go wrong sometimes. We see parents who are too proud of their children, not knowing how far they have pushed them to reach where they have.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. When you see a student, you see a family. Yeah. It's not just an individual. So you see the nucleus of the family with the student. So the education process shouldn't just stop at the student or fall short there. It should exceed that reach the parents as well, so the parents have an understanding, stakeholders, if you will, within the children's or within the child's development.
That's very correct. I would say for my enrollments at the British Grammar School, and I would like to get to know the parents very well when we enroll a student at the school, my first objective is to always know the parents first, then get to know the child later. Because if I don't see that promising environment for the child at home, then I wouldn't be so sure and so confident about what we could do for that child at school. So It's a team effort. Unless I see the parent willing to be part of that effort, I wouldn't see a point in enrolling their child, because that would be a waste of their times. So I would say, if we focus rather on the common grounds that we agree on with the parents, and rather than saying just, here are the pieces, go figure it out, this is what your child needs to learn, and then they need to be successful because we expect them to, but we don't care how. And this is where it gets unhealthy, so that's what we are avoiding for all intents and purposes there.
Absolutely. And another observation that I've noticed during my time here is the fact that you do embrace the family as well as the student, which is quite refreshing. We do have pockets of this where this is exhibited within the UK, but I have to take my hat off to you. You really do go beyond expectation and really facilitate a good environment for the family, not just the student itself, or him or herself. So credit to you for that.
Thank you very much. Well, having seen all the good values that we have implemented during our time in the UK, is what we wish to share with the local community in Kurdistan of Iraq as well, as we believe that we have a very robust, dynamic community. And I think you love the Kurds now more than ever, having seen us in the streets. And I'm not marketing for myself as a Kurd. I would assume that for all Kurds, as you've seen different practices, different places, and been to different places. It's because there's the space for people to grow. It's because the society is a friendly society that allows the friendliness and the gesture and the willingness and the eagerness of parents and students to all engage in education. And from how I have seen parents so enthusiastic about bringing their child over, making sure that their child gets the best education, their child learning from the only British school in Kurdistan of Iraq that is in the process of a different league of accreditation, as we are in the process of getting accreditation from governmental bodies in the UK rather than private bodies. And I think this fine line of making sure that we have the best representation of the country, the best representation of the values in the UK, and most of all, we are representing all of this with the Oxford International Curriculum. And we will come to what impact would that have on the child and the life of the child. So moving on to this topic in depth, how do you think we could practice that aspect of well-being during exam times, both at home and at school, whereby the child would feel in a thriving environment that would enable them to get a better success, and not only on paper, but rather a success that consolidates their learning and consolidates their journey in their life?
That's a very big question to unpack, but what I would say initially is instilling the value of learning into the child, so the child understands why they're there. The child sees a future where education plays a vital part. The reason as to why we study is for a better future. And so if the child has certain expectations and goals in life, if you facilitate and feed those desires, the child will have the impetus to do very well, and you'll see that in the work. And to further unpack that question is to explain regarding the well-being of the child so when the child attends exams, they need to be relaxed and confident and comfortable, reducing any kind of anxieties or fear, because some children fear their parents and they fear their peers even and their teachers, so they feel they have to hit a certain mark in order to succeed. Well, yes, in part that is correct, but if the child feels relaxed and is comfortable and is nurtured, the child will have the ability to access the memory bank, which they've been studying all year to retain this information, and it will flow. And so the way I like to explain it is, when you're desperate, you will not get as much done when you're stressed, when you're anxious. It's like falling into the sea and trying to grab onto something. You're going to sink. But when you relax, your body will float. And this is the type of mindset we should have when we come to any kind of obstacle, exam, test, even life challenges. Yeah. Try and orient yourself to be more relaxed rather than desperate or reactive. Be responsive rather than reactive. You'll get more out of it.
I'll stick to that. I think that's a very good rhyming set of words.
Yes.
Responsive than reactive. So, in terms of explaining fear in children, should children be afraid of their parents? And if there's such a fear, why should this have a negative impact on their well-being?
That's a very good question, Dr. Bawan. One that I'd like to answer in full, in the sense that we have to be very careful when it comes to fear. Because
what do you mean by careful? Is that
careful in how we instill fear into children, because we think it's important that the child is afraid of their parents because they won't do certain things which might damage them or damage others. And that's quite right. I mean, there needs to be some fear, otherwise people will do whatever they want and run riot.
But I think we have to define what do you mean by fear in the healthy way.
Absolutely. So discipline is good if it's done in a respectable manner, which isn't there to harm the child, but rather to teach the child that if their behaviour continues in a certain way, it will be worse than the discipline, or even to some degree punishment, because there is positive punishments out there. But we have to be mindful of what type of fear we're instilling in children. Yeah. So here we have fear which is positive if it averts the child from doing certain things which might be dangerous for the child or to others.
Correct.
And because the child has been brought up with manners and has a purpose and morality has internal moral compass is pointed the right way, will live a life to serve others and him or herself in the light of promoting and encouraging growth around them and themselves.
You should define that as the fear of trying to be helpful to others. This is the kind of fear that you want them to have.
Yes, fear that's if I offend you, that's not good. I'm afraid to offend my friend.
Because that will then break their heart.
Because it will hurt them in some sense, yes.
But I think the way that fear sometimes is interpreted is when fear is containing or is coloured with an element of disrespect. And this is where we should point out to parents that fear should never lead to the disrespect of that child. Because then, if a child's spirit is broken, then if the child is treated with disrespect, then it's quite risky that they will carry that behaviour to others and treat other people in the same manner.
This is where it becomes quite technical. And I would like to point out that when you discipline or punish a child too much, the fear, it becomes trauma. Yeah. It's a traumatizing experience for the child, which then develops a neurosis. Now, this is very important, and it's a very important point to make because a lot of parents don't understand this. But once they do understand this, they can correct their behavior towards the child so the child doesn't grow up as a nervous wreck.
I think this is important for us to start to explain neuroses to our audience to begin.
Yes, so neuroses is, to put it in layman's terms, is a condition someone might have where later in life they might feel anxious, for example, stressed, and they won't know the reason why. They might think they know the reason why. They have a false connection. So, for example, I had an argument with my friend yesterday, and this morning I've woken up feeling very anxious. That must be the reason why. We call that a false connection. The real reason why is probably because of a trauma they had experienced many years ago, which has formed a neuroses. The mind, what it has done is very cleverly has buried the experience, so you won't recall it, but the emotion associated has not been buried. So it flares to the surface. It surfaces, and you feel it, but you don't know the reason why. So, in my practice, many years ago, I had some cases where I had neurotic people attending, and they would express why they were feeling and want to know why they were feeling that way. Well, it's in psychoanalytical terms, it's because of child trauma. Maybe you were beaten, maybe you had a bad experience. Who knows what it might be, but. Unfortunately, a lot of parents don't understand what can actually happen to the child later in life if they overexert certain disciplines and hurt the child rather than support the child's growth.
I think one of those wrong practices that I have witnessed, and I would see that because I would notice a pattern there, is that there are certain elements where they compare how good or bad physical punishment can be. So someone would say, oh yeah, I don't beat my children much except when I slap them or smack them once or twice. But because in the science, and I will say this confidently as a neuroscientist, I have never heard of a healthy dose of beating up a child because no good impact will come from this whatsoever.
Absolutely correct. I couldn't add anything more to that because the point is what might seem as a light punishment, physical punishment, to the child's perspective, this is someone they look up to, maybe a hero. In their eyes, this is the person who has brought them into life, a very significant figure who is striking them. You see, so you need to understand the perspective of the child, not just a top-down perspective, but a bottoms-up perspective too.
Yes. I think it's fair to say that if they experience that abuse in their childhood, whether that's physical abuse or verbal abuse, because verbal abuse works equally as bad, or if it's neither, and we've discussed that with some educationalists as well, if they do experience some sort of disrespectful punishment, and that disrespect could be what they stand for in their community. Let's say if I have a group of students and if I don't pay attention to how respectfully I deal with their discipline, but rather think that I could punish them in front of the other students by disallowing them to do a certain thing, all of these activities would accumulate into a position of distrust. And I think it's fair to say that if students or children are in a position of distrust with their caregivers or their tutors, they will be spreading that all around them for the years they grow up into.
Absolutely, and it will lead to PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which they can link to, and they will understand, and so they will have a distrust in the very elements that they should be trusting in understanding how one should grow, because who else are they going to consult? You see, we're out of options. If you don't have your parents, if you don't have your teachers, who else do you have to support you?
So in that case, the hero who's seen as the parent in this case example would then turn into a villain because of that certain parent that you don't trust who's beaten you as a person growing up, then you will lose trust into believing what anyone else might say to you, because your most trusted confidant, your parent, actually did betray that trust with you in one point in their lives.
Absolutely. And this will manifest and play out as the child grows older in other people. So they will have a loss of confidence in support services, emergency services, counsellors, religious people. Why? Because from the onset of life, from the early ages, they have lost that confidence of a caregiver. And once you lose the confidence of the initial caregiver, it's destined to fail.
And I think it's fair to say, to link that into our topic today, which is well-being during exam time, I would like to reposition the actual fact there. Are exams a competition amongst students, or even worse, are they a competition amongst parents?
That's a very so if exams are a competition amongst parents, then it's a very toxic environment.
Yeah.
Because the parent is using the child as a pawn, as an instrument,
Yes.
to elevate themselves above other parents.
Yeah.
And that is very unhealthy.
Yeah.
In terms of the child competing with others, well, it's a form of competition, because we discover who what level certain students are at. Yeah, it's because we have exams, so we can examine the child's abilities. Some children might be better placed in maths or English, or and so their marks are a reflection of their ability, and then they can go out and get a job accordingly. So it does have a competitive element to it. But if you take it solely as a competition, you will feel the anxiety and the nerves throughout your academic years.
Yeah.
So being relaxed and seeing the exams as not a competition against other people or with other people, but rather with oneself. Yeah. You can develop yourself in the light of the information that you need to carry and to learn, and each year can be a progressive year for yourself. But if you're trying to compete with other people, you are learning, and you're instilling in your mind that life is a competition, and it's a race. And if you have that mentality, you're gonna burn out.
Yeah, I would fear mostly from the fact that, and speaking of fear, certain parents, for the success of their competition with other parents, using their children as the pawns to prove to other parents how better a parent they can be, or how proud a parent they can be, they might need to instill some fear. And all of this, to your point, which you mentioned is toxic, would create a bad sequence of events, one following the other.
Compounding effect.
Exactly.
Every year it's the same story. Well, you have to do well because we have a reputation to uphold, and so therefore the child isn't just carrying themselves, they find themselves carrying the family too, and then the family's reputation, and before you know it, the child becomes an egotistical, difficult person to work with in the future.
Exactly. Now, this is one thing I've noticed, because in a child-centered curriculum, the Oxford International Curriculum, the way we grade students, we don't grade them by marks. We grade them as a developing child, a secure child, and an extending child. Whereas a developing child might not have all the passing marks, but they will instead need all the support they can get for that. And a secure child knows enough to pass their grades, while an extending child knows beyond what they should be knowing for their age, and thus they require extra support in that respect as well. And I think this is all to demolish the hierarchy around what marks will bring, how parents can become more proud of their children, and why they should fear not getting the adequate, acceptable grades for their parents should they not meet the criterion to be an extending or a secure child.
Absolutely. What you're pertaining to is the holistic approach, which is very healthy. And so understanding the child on each level and looking at the ability the child has in different settings is so important to the child's development, because where the child might lack, for example, in mathematics, they might be able to make up in being able to solve problems. I know some dyslexic children, they find it difficult to read and they do struggle, but they are very, very intelligent when it comes to solving problems. So, again, there's that balance, and you are identifying that there is a balance there and you are addressing that. And so taking a holistic approach and nurturing the child in every dimension possible is paramount to the child's development, and also developing relationships with other children, other friends, for example.
I think this points out to two important keywords that I would like us to talk about, that they are wrong keywords to begin with. First is the naughty child. Second is the lazy child. I think these two terms are quite toxic, because then this is a term for comparison, and it's so inaccurate and unscientific, whereby if a teacher calls a child, this child is naughty or not doing good enough, or if a teacher labels a child, or because that the worst version happens at home, if a child is lazy, not good enough to do something or to learn something, then it becomes quite dangerous there.
Absolutely, and these are stigmatizing terms. So you have a child that might come across as challenging. A teacher might pick up on that and suggest that the child is naughty. Then they go and speak to the other teachers, and before you know it, the child has a reputation to being a naughty child. And so this language needs to be eradicated. So we have challenging behaviours which need addressing, and in doing so, you'll find that the child will be feel more embraced. They might be having problems at home, and they may be venting at school. Rather than classing the child as naughty and further disciplining the child, maybe we should embrace the child's home issues and discover what might be going on in order to adequately address the safety of the child, which now we turn to safeguarding, which I don't want to move too far away from the original topic, but it all feeds into the same thing. When we safeguard the child, we have parameters where the child can go and feel that they are safe and they are being nurtured the right way. And one more point I'd like to pick up on, that we had I had, beg your pardon, a lady yesterday ask me about their child's IQ. And they just said, how do I get my child to have a brighter future through the intelligence quotient being tested, for example. And my response to her was, why don't we investigate the child's EQ, emotional quotient? For me, is more paramount than the IQ. Because the EQ is a reading of the child's emotional well-being. And if the child is set up emotionally in a strong place, the IQ will follow.
Yes.
Because they feel comfortable, confident, and encouraged to learn, which takes me back to my original point.
Very good. I would say there's one balance element that we need to introduce here, which is to point out that when we derive it from the EQ rather than the IQ, it's also important to not overdrive the EQ.
Yes.
Because I would also see the end of the balance in the other line of the spectrum, where children are overboosted beyond their capacity. So let's say if my child doesn't do football well, then the advice is, no, you are the best footballer. But I will be telling my child a lie. Versus if my child is just allowed to thrive enough with football, knowing well that if they practice more, they can get better. So the safer practice is to say, you're the best at this, or you're a genius, is to say, that's a good behavior, that's a good result, that's a good exercise, that's a good practice.
Not allowing the runaway effect.
Exactly.
So, yes, and which is, again, brings us back to balance. And so we need that. Balance is the key term.
Yes.
And so we need that balance in order to construct a healthy environment for the child. And so we can be realistic too.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes. Because in terms of realism and education, it's I think, down to the important pinnacle where we say, if we set out a set of guidelines, just strategically for our parents and for our students, and in those guidelines we emphasize on, let's say, a set of golden rules for well-being at school, then a set of well-beings for the student at home, and a set of well-being rules for exam times. How can we categorize all these 3 points, knowing well that there are a lot of common areas between them all? So to find a balance there would necessitate us to discuss a few points about these, so that the children and the families and the teachers in all the schools can have these rules and work with in Kurdistan. Because as the British Grammar School, we feel obliged not to be the only school who practices these elements in our school and within our families and parents, but rather set out an inspiration for all the schools in Kurdistan and Iraq altogether, because we do and tend to reflect the values and the British values we represent in education, ingrained into the local values of the society here.
Absolutely, and we need to take into account that we do not want to be over stringent when trying to implement this type of change, because again, it's revolutionary, but being mindful and very careful with the way we offer different practices to facilitate the child's educational growth needs to be in part with the child.
Yeah.
We need feedback from the child.
Of course.
So the balance that, yes, we can as teachers, psychologists, parents, etc., look into this and discover what might work for the child over time. But the best people to consult are the children themselves.
I like that. That's a very good thing to say.
Yes.
Because to your point, I remember having practiced this with children so many times, and every time we practice that thing, whether you want to do a class activity, whether you want them to participate in a group activity, or whether they are wanted to carry out a task, if you ask them, regardless of their age, and I've tried that with children as young as 8 months and 10 months, as old as 16, if you make sure that what you're asking them to do as a classroom activity or a participation in an exercise, if you make sure that you ask them kindly and they are persuaded, they are brought on board, they are on board with that decision to take part, then they are more likely. Let's say if you offer milk to a 10-month-old child, instead of preparing the milk bottle and just shoving it in their mouth and just expecting them to start drinking, if you ask them gently, would you like some milk? And they would have a way to say yes or no accordingly. And imagine if you carry out doing that to children, then children will be able to express their words and enable themselves to express their opinions when they grow older.
Absolutely, because you're encouraging the child to take part in the stimuli outside of its internal environment. Yeah. So it sees something that it wants and finds a way to communicate what it wants and how much it wants at an earlier age, and that's advanced teaching, in my opinion.
I think it's imperative that we summarize what we discussed in a set of guidance and helpful support for parents at this time and age. So during exams, especially if children are facing difficult circumstances in their examination conditions, whether that is in the peer pressure sense or the sense of their school expectations, how would we define those rules for the parents to abide by, or advice for them to stick with when they are dealing with such stressful times with their children? What would your advice be for parents during these times?
Twofold. The first is to directly address that question, and I would say put the child's need at the forefront, not your own. So put the child's need at the forefront and encourage the child to do his or her best for the reason that you want to see the child succeed, and let the child buy into that idea, and he or she will feel more embraced, because they know that their parent wants the best for them.
Yes. That's
the first thing. The second part that I'd like to just mention is it's good also to look into techniques and how to memorize information and help the child to work on ways, methodology, or retaining information, and how to express him or herself for exams. And there are two exercises I'd just like to briefly point out.
Please, thank you.
The first is retaining information. If I were to say to you, please remember, and I know you, Dr. Bawan, you're very intelligent. I know you'll know these, so I'm not going to test you. But if I was to say, for the sake of the listeners, if I was to say, please remember these items: a pen, a bicycle, a stool, a car, a hand, a gun, a dice, skate, cat, laws. And I say, now please tell me what I just said. Some people may give me 5 of those items, some people, and I said to you, please give me them in order. Some people may only give me 3 of those items in order. Some people may even go up to 8. But if I was to say to you power of association, so I say to you, okay, pen, it looks like a number 1. 2, where you said bicycle, has got 2 wheels. 3, a stool, 3 legs. 4, a car, 4 wheels. 5, a hand, 5 fingers. 6, a gun, 6 chambers. 7, dice, because you have lucky number 7.
Yes.
You go to the gambling casinos.
Yes, of course.
8, skate, rhymes, and also the skating, you can do the figure 8.
Of course, yes.
9, cat, folks tell
9 lives.
9 lives,
Exactly.
and 10, law, you have the 10 commandments.
Exactly.
So by power of association, not only are you able to recall those items, but you can put them back in order.
Yes.
So that's the first point. I won't labour that. The second point is, very briefly, when we're trying to remember information, it's good to put it in story form because we do think in pictures. If I was to say to you, don't think of a pink elephant, what are you thinking of?
A pink elephant.
You're going to think of a pink
Naturally.
elephant. Exactly. So put information, construct information that you need to remember in story form.
Yeah.
I'm not really into football so much, but if I was to say to a child, please give me the story of what happened during Second World War, the Schniefen Plan, for example. And they were to say, well, I can't remember the generals, I can't remember the idea, I can't remember what the plan was. But if I say, well, okay, use famous footballers as generals and construct a story around that, you'll see the child will have the impetus, enthused to give you a story.
Yeah.
And they will put because they can relate to the football players. They can't relate to the generals of the Second World War.
Of course.
So it's about relating information, information in order to put it in story form so the child can express themselves in that way.
Amazing. I think that brings me to the point of making information relatable altogether.
Yes.
So if a parent were to encourage their children, they would try to inspire them by figuring out what's relatable in their learning, as well as a teacher does that. Because if there's no relatable learning, if you don't teach them what's the use of the utility of 1 + 1 in real life, then they would not feel as a part of that. And I've seen many children complain about that. They would say, well, I've studied all of these all my life. What's the use of these things? Can somebody tell me, please? But because they didn't have somebody to put that relatable information, put it into chunks and break it down so that they would understand the utility of element A, element B, element C throughout their journeys.
Yes, and this is taking a care-based approach because it takes more effort to explain. And one of the significant factors at your school that I have seen is that the teachers do take time to explain.
Yeah.
Which is so important. A student struggling, wanting to know more about a specific topic for the reason that they don't understand the principle, and the teacher is there explaining what it is that they should be learning and why they should be learning it in that way. Absolutely. And how they can apply it at a later time.
Absolutely.
And how everything is interrelated.
No, I think that element in learning is so important at the British Grammar School, Erbil. To the extent certain elements of that learning is paced at the speed of the child rather than the pace of the curricula. Because the way I see it, I have all the time in the world with my students at the school. And then when we come to the implementation, I would think since I have a plan, it's important that the child feels safe with every step of that plan. Should they feel the necessity to go faster, they have the amenities at their disposal because we have an online curriculum that they can access from home in line with the resources that teachers can provide them should they feel the need to do so. And whereby they need the opposite of that and they feel they're going too fast for a certain topic, then you have the certain element to do that as well. Because the way that a child-based or a child-centered learning would be approached in this sense, it will provide a safety haven for them. And that's why we preach to all teachers everywhere to consider 3 grouping of their children. One is through a group-based approach. The other one is through little breakdown group approaches or breakout groups, as we call it in the UK. And the third is one-to-one. Because all children might need all 3 throughout their learning in the week, because some of them might have emotional like protuberance to go through, or some of them might need a learning hive to dive into and just find themselves in that element of learning and be inspired by it. So I think it's down to the encouragement and also the enthusiasm for the child to feel that they need to learn from their learning environment as well.
And that's why it's so important to have the Oxford Learning Materials on board, because the Oxford Learning Materials take those into account and do provide insight into those methods of learning. And so this is why I think, you've got your finger on the pulse. You are doing things the right way, and I commend you completely for that.
Thank you so much. And I think I would like to finalize our interesting talk by just saying that if we are to encourage children in their learning environment to be their best, I think we would encourage them to say, instead of fearing your parents, respect them to the highest level. And also, when they give you advice, try to interpret it in the best sense that would be practical for you. So if you study for the sake of your parents, you will not be so much successful, as opposed to studying for the sake of your own learning. Then you will find that inspiring instead.
Absolutely. And in the famous words of Muhammad Ali, the great boxer, it's the very short poem, me, we, it's all of us.
Yes.
And if we're there for each other and we're there for ourselves and we support each other, we can get the job done efficiently and quickly.
Amazing. Now, I would just point out to the fact that if we are in that sense, isn't it fair to say, instead of parents imposing a certain opinion, let's say if I'm a busy parent and I want my child to do well in certain subjects or certain elements of their growth and health, instead of trying to push that through in a pulse of environmental distress to the child and say, this is your exam time, you're not allowed this, you have to study, because if you don't, you'll fail and you'll embarrass me in front of my kids, which is some competitive parents funnily do. If I instead delegate a reflection time with my child every day for, say, 10 minutes and sit down with my child and just not investigate, just find out how they're doing, find out what they need, find out how they can be supported, then if I'm a parent who doesn't know anything, then I would use that time to learn something from them and base my approach on their requirements and their needs rather than what I can approach and give it to them because I feel they need this and they must listen to me because I'm the parent, otherwise they will fail in life. Which is so dramatic things you may hear from a parent sometimes. Just because they are so sincere does not mean they always know what the child needs, and this is why parents need to listen. So any advice on that last part, on how we can help parents listen better to their children?
I think explaining the importance of listening and being quick to listen but slow to respond, because we need to dissect the situation. It's no good running in there and being impulsive and trying to fix something as quickly as possible, because we need to move from an informed position. And if we're not informed, we're not going to be effective. And if we move too quickly, we haven't had time to dissect the situation. So my advice is to the parents, listen carefully to what your children is telling you, because if you don't listen carefully, you might miss the point that the child is trying to make, and you might be the problem.
Yes.
You see?
Correct.
So this is why it's so important that we listen carefully, dissect, and then respond. And it might take time, but if you do it the right way, you only have to do it once.
That's correct. I think that's a very good sort of icing on the cake, shall we put it this way. And I'm really grateful to have you here on board with us at our podcast, because we are hoping to propagate this to the British Grammar School radio, and our radio channel, which should be accessed online, will reflect all of these elements as we are hoping to produce more podcasts with you. And the talks that we will do will revolve around the well-being of a child, and honing on your expertise as a child psychologist. I think you are a tremendous resource for Kurdistan and all the people of Kurdistan, other than the children of the British Grammar School. Really grateful for your presence today here.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
And
for
I
having
wish to continue that on our next talks, because I still have a lot of questions on my mind, but I will use your great mind even when you're in the UK, because we expect you to visit us as soon as you can again,
Yes.
so you can have more talks with the parents in person. But in the meantime, we'll try to do some online sessions with you as well, and invite some parents for some webinars for open questions as well in this soon time as well.
Absolutely, it'd be a pleasure. And thank you for having me. It's been a wonderful experience and refreshing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And for all our audiences, thank you so much for joining us on this podcast. And we wish to entertain you more in the future talks that we do at the British Grammar School podcast series. But make sure you follow us, you follow our plans, and as we unfold all the educational guidelines and curriculum for you, because we want to make sure that our children and all the children of Kurdistan and Iraq get the best of what is out there in the knowledge and the science, in the pedagogy, in making sure that children grow up to be the healthy versions of themselves and future leaders of this country, and ensure the success of our country, so that we can be a pinnacle, an example of success for students, for their inspiration, for their well-being. Thank you so much, and bid you farewell.